having Red Bull invest in rugby, I think it's great for the sport. The impact it'll have on Newcastle will be huge. They've gone through quite a challenging period, and the potential that Red Bull have to grow that club, grow that fan base nationally and internationally. They're amazing marketers, so they'll have a big impact on that club. And in turn, that has a big impact on the league. We pride ourselves on being a competitive league. We've had 5 different winners in 5 different years. Disruption has been a big thing, or challenger leagues have been a big thing, especially in rugby, but you sort of need to stick back to the core about what fans actually want. You can whiz bang a sport and try and make it sexy and appeal, but actually you need to have something that is competitive, that means something to fans, means something to players as well. You're playing for something. And so there's that balance. There's been a generation of investors that have carried the Prem through the sort of first couple of stages of professionalism, and we're starting to see another generation come through that aren't necessarily individual custodians, fans. It's getting beyond benevolence now into actual rational strategic investment. Within months, the pandemic hit, and the unfortunate thing is
Simon, thank you so much for joining. Welcome to Business of Sport.
Thanks for having me.
Perfect timing. Some big news last week that I'd love to start with, because you announced the takeover of Newcastle Falcons from Red Bull. So I'm really keen to understand what the significance of that is, both to the club, but also to the league as a whole.
Yeah. So, Red Bull's investment is a massive endorsement for the Prem. They believe in our vision. They believe in the direction of travel we're heading. They believe in the sport as well. And they've got big ambitions for the club. I think if you break it down in terms of what the impact is, I think first and foremost that the impact it will have on the northeast, which is a really important region for rugby in the UK and in England. That they've got an ambition around really investing in youth and the pathway and the academy there. So that in itself is exciting. So can you imagine being a young athlete, talented, up and living in the northeast, trying to choose your sport, and there's a Red Bull Academy up there. I think that in itself will be quite inspiring. And then they have a huge amount of experience in terms of high performance and developing young athletes. And so that will be great. That in itself is fantastic. The impact it'll have on Newcastle Red Bulls now as a club equally will be huge. They've gone through quite a challenging period, as you know. They've been bottom of the league for the last couple of seasons, and the ability or the opportunity or the potential that Red Bull have to grow that club, grow that fan base, obviously within the region, but also nationally and internationally, is huge. They're amazing marketers, and so they'll have a big impact on that club. And in turn, that has a big impact on the league. We pride ourselves on being a competitive league. And so if we've got all 10 clubs who are competing at the top level, we've had 5 different winners in 5 different years. And now with the idea that Newcastle Red Bulls could be up there as well in time, I think it will take them time to get there, is great. But I think more broadly, having Red Bull invest in rugby, an investor of their stature and the trajectory they're on generally within sport, which is super exciting, I think it's great for the sport.
How does it work when someone like Red Bull wants to buy into that club? The involvement of the league centrally and the owners of a club, is it a dual negotiation? Is it a dual conversation that takes place?
Yeah, so ultimately it's a deal that needs to be done with the club and the owner of the club, and clubs will either look to sell part of their club or sometimes look to completely exit. And that was the case in Newcastle. So Seymour Curdie made it clear a few years ago that he was looking to exit. And in that process, he wanted to leave responsibly. And so they appointed advisors. The advisors helped engage the market. And then once you got to a stage where there was a deal on the table, you do then need certain permissions and regulatory approval. You have to pass fit and proper tests, which the RFU oversees, and PRL needs to, Premiership Rugby or Prem Rugby needs to approve these things as well. So there's various sort of regulatory things on top of it. But I think more and more, I see it as part of my role in terms of attracting future investors into the league and into these teams. We're in a situation where the most recent majority investment that was made into a Prem club prior to Red Bull, I think back in 2016 when Simon and Michelle Orange bought Sale Sharks. But beyond that, there's been a few deals within the club's existing sort of group, minority shareholders. But we're starting to see appetite for a new breed of investors coming in and taking on these clubs. So I think there's been a generation of investors that have carried the Prem through the sort of first couple of stages of professionalism. They only went professional, back in 96, 97. And we're starting to see another generation come through that aren't necessarily individual custodians, fans. It's getting beyond benevolence now into actual rational strategic investment, and Red Bull's one of them.
How much of this is curating, as you say, an attraction of the league as a whole? Because let's be honest, Red Bull's a sexy investor. People know them. They know that they've got a footprint in lots of really cool things. When you see these types of brands coming to the table, looking to invest their money, identifying this as an area that is strong enough to receive them, you must take that as a really positive thing for the direction that you're moving in.
Well, if you look at sport generally, the concept of partnership has loads of different levels. And not only your partners are your broadcast partners and your sponsors, and people that are helping you deliver a league, a product, a competition. But the people that own the teams are partners in the sports as well. And I think if you can find partners who are delivering value, who have invested elsewhere, who have seen other things, who can bring something to the table, and in Red Bull's case, the fact that they are expert marketers and really understand high performance, genuinely understand high performance and what it takes, that adds value. And so I think they'll be a great partner to the sport.
Okay. So based on all of that, tell us a little bit. When we did our interview with Bill Sweeney, one of the most important parts that we said right at the beginning was, let's be really clear about what the role that you play in the RFU is and in rugby is. And I'd like to do the same with you. I think it's really important that we understand exactly what the chief exec of Prem Rugby is actually charged with.
Sure. Okay, so Prem Rugby has two different types of shareholders. We've got the clubs, so the 10 Prem clubs, and we've got CVC, who own 27% of the league. So they invested back in 2019. So we've got a private equity investor in there as well. So structurally, that's it. In terms of a business, my core role is to be a promoter of the league, to grow the league, to grow the sport. We have certain commercial rights that we sell, broadcast rights, sponsorship rights. We run certain events like the final, but we also run the standards and the regulation, and therefore operate the league. Things like the salary cap is a good example. We've now got our own financial monitoring panel within the league as well to ensure that we've got clarity over where clubs are and how they're trading. And so that as a business, that as a core role, is Prem Rugby. But like a number of other sports, we operate in a wider system. And so if you think about rugby in England, you've got the national team, you've got the club game, which feeds into that. And within the clubs, we operate academies, which obviously identify the talent and the pathway that leads up to being a pro rugby player and ultimately becoming England internationals. And underneath that's the community game, which the RFU oversees as a governing body, but we've got a key link into because of the pathway and also because of the fact that they're the future fans. So there's this whole ecosystem we're a part of, and our main relationship and partnership within that is the professional game partnership we have with the RFU. And so that is all about the academies. That's all about the release of England players. That's all about investment into the system that we operate. And that's governed by a joint venture board that we have with the RFU and the RPA. Joint
venture, probably. Power, equal share of power in those things. You feel like that's a fair distribution. You get what you need out of it. The RFU gets what they need out of it. It's a good model for rugby in this country to be operating on.
Yeah, and I mean this is evolved from. If you want to do a bit of a history lesson, the back in the day, the RFU as a governing body had to make the decision around how the professional game was going to be managed in this country. Now, some unions decided to own and run their own professional teams. A good example of that is in Ireland. But the choice back in 95, 96 was that there was going to be a separate private league that was going to be run and funded by individual team owners. And so if you think about the allocation of risk, financial risk within the system, and you think about the nascent stage of professionalism, which has been, there's been a huge amount of growth since that point, and and thankfully it's continuing to grow. It's required a lot of investment, and so there's been a huge amount of risk that's been put on club owners to get to this stage, and obviously that risk was put under a very precarious situation during the pandemic, where we were having to fund significant losses to get through it. But in return, there's funding from the RFU to pay for the release of the players, to attend training camps, and to be part of the England setup. And that's so important to England in terms of the cohesion they need, the access they need, the influence they need in terms of England players getting on the pitch. And then sitting underneath that again is this partnership, co-funding of the academies, because there's a mutual interest on that. So it's moved from quite a transactional relationship, quite a tense relationship. There's been plenty of fights over the year because it's all about access and it's all about the calendar. And I think everyone knows that historically the rugby calendar is, you ideally need about 60 odd weeks a year, and there's a finite amount of game time rugby players can play. It's a brutal sport. So we've worked hard to try and relieve a lot of the tensions. And we felt that actually having an equal board with the players there as well, and that's a key thing. So not only have we got sort of equal votes between the RFU and the PRL, but the RPA are there as well. And then we've got independents there as well, which we think are important in terms of just an objective view and other expertise. So I think it's much better run, much more of a partnership. And so, I think joint venture is the right term.
Okay, perfect. I mean, so much of the conversation today around the sport comes back to money, which is perfect for this show, obviously. But so it's definitely something we should go into. I want to break this down almost in kind of three areas where we can look at it from investment, we can look at it from governance, we can look at it from commercial. But the investment piece beginning this chat is really important because of that involvement you mentioned from CVC and them coming in to take a significant percentage of a league. Tell us about the influence of that, but also the timing, because that run into COVID and then what's happened since has naturally shifted the landscape.
Yeah, so I think private equity in rugby in this country has been around for a while now. But back to the point where clubs were individually funded by the owners. In 2019, the league was approached by CVC to take investment centrally within the league. And if you think about the moment in time, there was a significant period of growth. Over a period of about 10 years, it was growing sort of 9-10% a year in terms of revenue. So it was riding a broadcast boom, but then also locally in terms of ticketing and sponsorship, there was decent growth. It was a fragmented environment, and there were certain elements of governance that made it difficult to move on. But CVC saw a genuine opportunity, and equally so did the clubs in terms of taking on external capital to fuel this next stage of growth. Now, within months, the pandemic hit, and the unfortunate thing is, whilst clubs did manage to invest in certain things, training facilities, and other projects, everything's on hold as you're managing a massive crisis. And the scale of losses during that period was significant, and, well reported. So that whole sort of investment plan had to pause. We were spending some of the central capital that was there, and we spent £4 million on COVID tests, right? It's crazy what we were having to avert resources on just to stay alive, in terms of the pandemic. And actually, if it wasn't for 120 odd £million worth of government loans that came in as part of a sport recovery fund for sport generally, then all the clubs would have gone bust during that period. So it was a real massive shock to the system and bad timing in terms of CVC's investment. But the thesis around the growth potential of the league was still there, right? And I've been in the environment now for nearly 9 years. I worked at the RFU for 5. And I always felt that the gap between the international game and the club game was too big, given the quality of the product and the scale of interest within rugby within the country. So the concept that there was growth and you need to maximise it was part of my role coming in 22. So I came in January 22, just after lockdowns had finished and testing had stopped, but But unfortunately, also when you're about to sort of get the second wave of the impact of the pandemic in terms of the economic impact it had on clubs. But the growth thesis was still there. And so whilst we've had to deal with that crisis in terms of those 3 clubs going into administration, we were working hard on getting the foundations in place and getting a marketing plan in to try and capitalise on that. So you fast forward to where we are now in 2025, and you're starting to see a really good, healthy trajectory in terms of interest, and all that whole thesis around where bridging the gap between club and international, we're starting to chew away at that at quite a rate. So that's really exciting, but you're going to need more investment again. You're going to need to get clubs to raise the standards again. Because I think it's about the quality of the product ultimately, and we're in a really competitive market. We're in a market where there's a lot of rights holders who have or sports where interest is waning, is interest in declining. We're in a stage where actually we're bucking a market trend because there's a market opportunity, but they'll reach a point that we need to invest further to make the product more premium. And so that's really the next stage of this, is to elevate the standards and to make this the best possible product it could be.
Okay, and that feeds nicely into, I guess, the second part of that financial question, which is investment into governance. Because if I'm investing in something, I want to make sure that the market is capable of supporting that investment. And this is really challenging in sport because the opportunity may absolutely be there in a club, but that club operates in a wider market. And if that market isn't strong enough to support it, there's actually a limited amount that I can do to properly influence it. So you mentioned the 3 clubs that went bust. You've mentioned the news that's come out around that, and I can only imagine the challenges that presented internally. How do you view the governance structure within rugby now, where you are making sure that the finances of the game, the finances of these clubs are as secure as they need to be so that primarily they can continue to operate as sporting entertainment assets, but also then secondly, that you can not just stay alive and sustain, but you can grow, you can attract more investment, you can build better product?
So I actually love the subject of governance, which if I checked myself about sort of 5 or 6 years ago, I would have given myself a big slap around the face because I thought, I'm a commercial guy, I'm a finance guy, governance is what's the point in governance, right? But when you work in a sort of commercial sphere within sport, good governance becomes so important in getting stuff done and making sure things are regulated and operating well, so that again you can sell it to investors. So your point's absolutely spot on, and I think that the truth is, even if we'd had the best governance in the world, the impact of the pandemic may not have. Those 3 clubs going bust, I don't think you would have regulated your way out of that, or you couldn't have really necessarily governed yourself out of that. They were just the 3 houses built closest to the sea when the big wave came. I think that's just a reality of those situations. However, there's been plenty to clear up in terms of governance because it's a complicated landscape. So we've mentioned the professional rugby board with the RFU. The fact that that's now got independent board members, is more of a JV in structure, much clearer decision making, devolved into that group. That's a really important foundational thing for the game. So that's good. In terms of financial regulation within the league, we already had the salary cap, and the salary cap was important from a product point of view to make it competitive, so that there was a level playing field coming in onto the pitch, but it's also important in terms of capping spending in a league that's still growing and is still nascent. So that was, but then on top of that, we created this financial monitoring system, which allowed us to actually see how clubs were trading, and we're building on that year on year in terms of regulation that we need to have in place to make clubs on the outside look more investable. And so, whether that's debt levels, whether that's trading levels, like we wanted to put more and more regulation in place so that it becomes attractive to investors. And we've had that feedback directly from investors. It's not a comfortable thing to be in for current club owners who have used to doing what they're doing, but everyone buys into the fact that we need to make this investable as possible. So an independent financial monitoring panel is really important. And then just within our own governance setup, we actually had sort of 2 different boards that existed within the Prem. We had a sporting board and a commercial board, but anyone that's operated in sport for any period of time will realise how those 2 things are linked. So I was bouncing between sort of 2 boards, which wasn't necessarily the most functional thing. So we've combined those boards and got everyone in the same room and with the same agenda. And surprise, surprise, we're making much more aligned decision making. We're moving further forward. But there's still issues within governance within the game. The RFU is going through a governance review at the moment. And if I was to really simplify it and try and sort of define what bad governance is, you just don't want a system where a tail's wagging the dog in terms of decision making. If you've got a clear direction that you need to go on, and the general view and consensus and logic is that you're going in a certain direction, you don't want to have that growth potential stifled by a minority view, which is valid, and clearly we're a sort of we're a democracy in any sort of form, but is being held up in terms of progress. So you need to keep a check on things, but if that tail's wagging the dog too much, then you've got problems.
And at what point do you need the governance become reality and put into practice, and actually, should we say, show developments on the field? And I don't mean on the field in performance, but I mean that as long as clubs, and last season, or when it last accounts, every single club in the Premiership lost money, some at very different levels. It's about 40 million, I think, total losses. We have this issue in football. It's the sustainable model. Sustainable in football quite often means you don't lose as much money as someone else, or you lose as much money as someone's willing to put in. But eventually you may get a situation where someone is no longer willing to put in or can't. And then we're back at a potential Wasps, Worcester, Irish problem. So as good as all the work around is, how, again, as the leader of this organisation and making sure that you are trying to do all you can to protect these clubs, at what point do you need to start getting slightly harder and go, this financial model can't be built on owner financing, it has to be financially sustainable?
Well, I think Newcastle is a brilliant example of that, where because of the fact that we had transparency in the system, because we had this accountability to report where you were, essentially, you're able to spot challenges that may be 1-2 years ahead, and that allowed us to therefore plan, work with the club around appointing advisors, help market, and ultimately bring in Red Bull. But you need to. I do believe that. A point on the losses. Actually, we're moving to a situation where those are starting to get better and better. We've just done a last financial regulation round, and the accumulated loss is significantly better than it was a few years ago. Debt is being paid down, revenues are significantly growing. So we're chipping our way and trading our way out of this challenge that we found ourselves in the last few years, and that's really positive and a really encouraging sign to investors, because we've got a decent growth curve. There's more that we need to do structurally in terms of the general balance sheet of the sport, the government loans. There's shareholder loans that sit within clubs which aren't callable in terms of current investors. But generally we're moving in the right direction. But there's more structural things we need to do, and there is a reality here that we are going to need to continue to invest over the next few years. Like, we need to get standards to where they are. So going back to the point I made earlier, I see it as much more our role in terms of generating that investment and that interest. And we're actually going through a process now with the RFU as well, through the PRB, in how we can structure the Premiership to optimise investment. So we're working with Rain and Deloitte, who worked together most recently with the 100 process, which I think we'll all agree has been a very successful outcome. And they're helping us on sort of twofold, really. One is just general operating standards and governance models that we need to refine within our own ecosystem, and the second piece is market making and actually making sure that we've got a product there that investors are going to want to put money into.
So, independent regulation, again, topic in football. Have you looked at that? Is that something that you think is useful? I have my own opinions on it, and I'm interested to know how capable you think a sport is to actually govern itself versus requiring someone to come in and regulate it for them.
Well, I think ultimately that the market will push yourself to regulate as much as you need to. Do you know what I mean? Investors won't invest unless they're comfortable within the regulatory environment that they're operating in. And so that's pushed us in a certain direction. self-regulation needs to come with its own checks, and so with that there needs to be an element of independence. So for example, the chair of the Financial Monitoring Panel is an independent. We have an independent chair and INEDs that sit on the Men's Professional Rugby Board. We bring in third parties that oversee the salary cap, for example. So there's elements of needing the outside to test and check what we do, so we're not marking our own homework here. And I think that is an important signal to future investors. I think having government involvement and that comes with its challenges. I don't think we need that. I don't think we're at that stage at all. I think we're sort of going in a much better direction. So yeah, I think it's all about independence.
Investment, when you talk about it, are you talking about a balance between CVC type investment, so what we would call central core investment into Prem Rugby, and then investment into the teams? Are we looking at everything?
At this stage, yeah, we're right in the thick of a process at the moment, looking at the options. I think that ultimately it's for the investment requirement is at a local level within individual clubs, and that investment requirement is different across wherever a club is in terms of how it's trading at the moment, its current ownership. I think the key thing is that the centre, the league, is able to help with the providing a market for that capital. So whether that's a change in individual ownership, whether that's other sort of types of balance sheet restructuring, I think we play much more of a role within that and provide central solutions where they're needed. But I think it's not necessarily about selling more equity in the league. There are other structures and means to do that.
Commercial importance is huge then on that, because you want to basically make this a place where loads of money is being filtered into the clubs and those P&Ls look way better than they are currently. So let's look at the final part of that financial assessment then, which is the commercials and your role in actually generating money for the league and the sport. What sits on your plate, and how much of it is down to the clubs to be autonomous and be responsible again for their own deal making?
Yeah, so it's about a £200 million economy that exists in terms of what was generated from the centre and what is generated at a local level from the clubs. And if you take the sort of main bucket of local club income, which is sponsorship, ticketing, F&B, that's about £130 odd million worth of locally generated income. When you look at central rights that the Prem has, they're quite lumpy in terms of broadcast deals. So we're just on a sort of 5-year broadcast deal, and it's going in the right direction, and that's all sort of locked in, title sponsorship and other ancillary sponsorship. So you can work hard on the sponsorship side, but really the main bit of growth is going to be on ensuring that the more commoditized local revenue, so ticketing, F&B, sponsorship, merchandise, is trading in the right direction. Again, the positive is that it is, but I think there is again a bigger role for the centre in playing and helping drive that. So I'll give you a good example. We've worked hard to have a much more collective ticketing strategy. So whilst the clubs compete on the pitch every week, that in terms of ticketing interest, it's much more localized. But a lot of the principles and marketing principles that are happening in Exeter can be applied up in Newcastle or in Sale or whatever. And so we've worked to have the clubs on a central ticketing provider, and that there's a central database and analysis that's going on that allows us to then provide what we call collective insights, and then also have collective campaigns, like just simple things like everyone goes on sale for the season at the same point. That creates a big splash, and therefore that has a big uptick. So we've become obsessed with the occupancy figure individually of clubs and also across the league, as well as obviously trying to improve yield. And clubs are again at a different stage there in terms of whether they sell out every weekend, something like Quins, or whether there's lots of headroom where there is, for example, at Newcastle. So we're very conscious of that because that's cash next week, and that's a really big opportunity for us. So ticketing and sponsorship as well, to the extent that the collective deal makes more sense across the league, collective kit deals, things like that. So that's where we're going to play much more of a role. And if you think about The word franchise gets bandied about a lot, but in terms of some of the principles of franchise structures, that strong central support and coordination over commercial rights and growth is a key part, I think.
Media, you negotiate centrally as Prem Rugby. So the TNT deal, for example, that's through you.
Yeah. But I think, that 100%, that's our main income stream as the Prem. But if you look at PRL, Prem Rugby, 10 years back, essentially sort of pre-CVC, it was quite a sort of B2B business. It did, when I talked about the roles of my responsibilities, chief executive responsibilities, the leagues, it was quite B2B. You do a broadcast deal, you do a title sponsorship deal, you organise the fixtures, and that's it. There wasn't a huge amount of central resource, marketing budget, and what we're seeing, we've built up our marketing team. We've incrementally built up our marketing spend, and we've seen the impact that has in terms of the promotion of the league. And so I think a lot of the growth and interest we're seeing is because now we've got a more coordinated marketing unit centrally and how it works with clubs, and that's making a difference.
So media is always, it's held up as almost the core of the leagues that make the most money. And I think there's two sides to it, right? You can get really drunk and happy on it, but then it can also present risks because it does create a huge overdependence if anything happens. If you're looking at the current deal, right, it's a brilliant deal. It was a record deal for Prem Rugby. It was 200 million over 5 years with TNT. So say 40 million a year, give or take. So that's equally distributed as 4 million to the teams per year. But that's not, in comparison to other sports, and when you've still got significant cost base in rugby, that's not huge amounts of money to be able to then grow a lot of that work. So is that something that does it all go hand in hand? As the product continues to develop, as the fans come in, the media obviously becomes more of a core piece of revenue that then facilitates being able to pump that money back in. I'm careful. I don't want to shit on a great deal, but do you know what I'm?
There's a lot to unpack here, and so let me start off by saying, if you look at a business plan for a new league or a new concept, or even an investor's view on the future of a league, if the biggest number is media, you've got to be a bit wary and a bit scared, especially if it's following a hockey stick flow, which isn't necessarily where the market's going. If you look at that £200 million economy, then it's about 20% of that. So it's not the system isn't overly reliant on a single income stream, which could go up and down. So I think our reliance on it is balanced. And that's good because, again, going back, there's other more commoditized, more predictable income streams which have growth potential, which we can focus on. I guess, again, you get worried if you're sort of having to focus so much on short-term media deals that, are going in 2-3 year cycle, that will only do this sort of length deal because there's going to be a big uptick in the next one. It's amazing so we've just signed a 5-year deal with TNT. So they are a brilliant partner for rugby. They've proven track record in the production that they put on place and everything they've got behind. It's amazing when you actually now sign a long-term deal with them, how it changes your focus as a business, because you can then be much more long-term, much more strategic, and drive all the things that ultimately in 5 years' time, when we sit down and we talk about where we were and where we are, we can show demonstrable difference rather than 2 years worth more of trading, and it's hard to put a finger on where you are. So it makes us into a much more strategic operation. But then also, if you look at the broadcaster, it means they can invest in the long term, right? So they're not thinking whether they're going to have these rights in a couple of years' time. They know that they're there and they're going to invest in the product, and so it totally changes the dynamic and creates much more of a partnership. So we're in a great spot with TNT Sport. And they're now super excited about investing in the long term and doing a lot of innovation, which again they're famous for, but now they can double down on it. So that's great. And again that becomes quite self-fulfilling, doesn't it? Because again that's going to help generate new audiences. That's going to make the product superb. and that's going to drive growth. And so again, you can have that conversation in 5 years' time, and it'd be in a really good spot.
To close off the investment piece, then, we were talking, and there's been obviously so much conversation around emerging leagues and concepts and different ways to disrupt rugby, and R360 is a key one of those, but also the opportunities that are presented when challenger competitions come into play for the existing leagues and teams. What do you think about? How do you think about that when you have something like R360 on the table, but then you also have what Prem Rugby has to its advantage: established audiences, storied assets, huge opportunity, but of course with the need to build more value into that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's from what I've heard about R360, it's a set of ideas and principles which we're a call to our strategy and our vision of where we're working. It's all about improving the fan product. It's getting the best players on the pitch. It's about global growth as well. So there's a lot of things we agree with them. The key thing with where we are is we've got the foundations. We've got 150 years worth of history with some of these clubs and the fan bases and the regions that exist behind it, and we've now got a significant amount of momentum. So the sort of pitch around innovation and growth and all those types of things and quality is absolutely there. We talk about standards, and that's what we're trying to elevate. But I think it's incumbent on everyone to continue to try and self-disrupt, not disrupt, and constantly challenge what you've got and whether it's right going forward. I don't know if you've seen Happy Gilmore 2 yet?
No.
Have you
not yet?
Oh, right. Okay. Well, for those that have seen Happy Gilmore 2, there's quite a good parody on sort of the concept of a challenger thing, because it's golf, and they've essentially sort of got a live golf sort of a disruptor that's there. I think it's called the Maxi League or something. And what the part of the message of that is, there's sort of, you can whiz bang a sport and try and sort of make it sexy and appeal, but actually fundamentally you need to have something that is competitive, that means something to fans, means something to players as well. You're playing for something, and so there's that balance. And I know sort of disruption has been a big thing, or challenger leagues have been a big thing over the last however 20 odd years. There seems to be a lot of things, especially in rugby. We've had like 12s knockout and X rugby, I think, at one point. But you sort of need to stick back to the core about what fans actually want. You
talked about your use of the word franchise. You made just a brief reference to it. Why do you think that is important? And has the system now, with the promotion and relegation system, and just a brief explanation on that in an answer to this would be great for people. But why do you actually think it is important now? If we're just playing to the modern market and economy and attraction of rugby as a sport, that those small tweaks in how we talk about something like this actually influence what people understand as proper value.
Yeah. So franchise means different things to different people. I think there's a lot of elements that we have which are already, elements that people would identify as part of a franchise setup. A good example of that is something like the salary cap, actually. So central, strong regulation that ensures competitiveness, and that in itself is attractive for investors because it means there's a chance of winning, and the chance of winning is really important when you look at your own sort of respective commercial models. An element of centralisation exists already. You talk about media rights, but it's something that we're looking to continue to move on and have much more of an influence on other commercial elements, which I think is a core franchise feature. But you also you need a stability as well for investors. Now that moves into quite an emotive topic about promotion and relegation, and we live in a country with football where that's a key part of the system. And there are I think there's probably one other example within rugby, within France, where they have two tiers and there's a flow between those two leagues. I think for our system within England, and I've come on a journey with this, but having worked at the RFU previously, but I think there's a realization that we're trying to find solutions that suit our system. We're not trying to copy someone else's. And I think for us, we're in a system where we can only really sustain one professional league and make that the best as it possibly can, and drive the standards, because that's another key part of what I see as franchise in terms of high standards driven from the centre, which therefore qualify yourself to be part of the franchise. So I think there should be a risk if you're not meeting standards, that you don't you don't get squatters' rights. But I think we should have the ambition to grow our core league with more regions and more brands and more teams that way. So there are aspirational teams that sit within the champ, and I think they should have an opportunity to join the Prem in the long term once we're at a point where we can accommodate more teams. But equally, there's other regions that have big potential. The South East is one of them. There's no professional rugby team within that region, and I think it contains 22-23% of both English rugby and also Prem fans. And the nearest club for someone who's in Kent is Harlequins.
What do those standards look like for a champ team to be able to promote themselves or participate in Prem?
Yeah, so I think it's a multiple set. Some of it's infrastructure, and that's the sporting infrastructure, the quality of your academy, the quality of your welfare provisions. So on a sporting side, there's that, and then on a sort of fan side, it's the quality of your stadium. It's also the experience that exists within there when fans go to it. People now are quite discerning in terms of what they choose to go and not go to, and so the right infrastructure there, also the infrastructure there that makes it look good on TV. Once things look good on TV, generally that starts to push interest to actually go to the events. I mean, if you rewind back to really the sort of beginning of the Premier League, that was a big push to have full stadia looking good on TV, and that drove the sort of desirability to actually go and buy a season ticket or go and turn up. So I think that's important. Governance, again, let's go back to governance, but again, that is important in terms of how your boards are constructed, how you make decisions, how you financially regulate yourself. And then I think you need to push harder and harder in terms of fan growth, and so that you need to be accountable for your database is increasing, your fan base is increasing, and then finally the quality of product on the pitch. You want people to invest in players. You don't want to have people who are sort of hanging out at the bottom of the league and spending as little as they possibly can and just getting by. You want really good quality there.
We've kind of danced all around that side, which is really important to build some of the foundations. But then, of course, marketing, fan growth, the numbers in and around the sport right now, particularly Prem side, are really positive, right? We're looking at some good trajectories. All of this that we've talked about financially needs to be put in place to build some of that infrastructure. And to do that properly, you need something that people actually want to follow. Right?
Yeah.
Start right at the beginning. It was a big move that you guys made, Prem Rugby, Gallagher Prem Rugby.
Yep.
Why?
Well, we were it's quite interesting actually. So when I started, my first hire was a guy called Rob Calder, who was the commercial marketing director from the 100. And I was sort of like slightly obsessed with this sort of concept of the power of the new, right? So, you need to totally sort of reposition yourself or start something up new or whatever else, reset, which is essentially what the 100 had gone through. And so we were. Rob's been around since for the last 3 years, and so we've been on a journey. And actually, once you listen to fans and to players, what we understood that was actually different from the 100 was, well, for a start, that the product is really good. The rugby is really good. It's competitive. These teams really mean something to people. And go and Google the victory parades in Bath or in Northampton the last couple of years when they've won the Prem, and you'll see that in spades. It's really exciting rugby as well. So the actual product on the fish is unpredictable. There's all those types of things. The DNA of something you really want in any sports property. So that was great. And actually, when you speak to fans about who we are, we're just replaying what they say we are, and people call us the Gallagher Prem. That's part of the vernacular. So we're just speaking how fans are speaking really with that. But it also it's where we've concluded isn't a radical rebrand of calling ourselves the Big Smash or whatever else you could have ended up doing.
Did that come on the table? Come on.
Felt like a big smash at one point. But, so this was an evolutionary thing, playing back what fans and players think we are, and then just accentuating a lot of the key elements. So this whole sort of gladiatorial spirit, this whole athleticism that exists within our sport is so unique. And I remember seeing that. I forget who did it. I think it was EMY did that Gen Z study on, and rugby had dropped, hadn't it? It dropped down to just, I think it may not have even been the top 20 in terms of relevance for Gen Z. And so throughout this whole research phase, we're like, well, what's wrong with the sport? Why aren't people appealing to it? And actually, again, when you look at the core DNA of what people want, they want athleticism, they want the whole sort of brutality of the sport actually was something that really resonated with young people. So all these things were there, they just weren't promoted enough. And so we're investing a lot more in content now that starts to play that back to people. And actually, what we're seeing even in the last year is significant growth in the 18 to 34-year-olds. Like that's growing 30% in terms of interest in the last year. And that's just from basic marketing and just basically getting it out there. So I think, the concept of the Prem and what it is, I think it's building notoriety. I believe it's very exportable. I think in terms of, if you look at global sport, there's only really room for sort of, one, maybe in football, two global sort of club leagues that exist. And in football, that's obviously the Premiership, the Premier League. In rugby, I think it was Super Rugby. Do you remember back in the day? That was when it first. You're a bit younger, when Super Rugby first came out, that was exciting. That was Renegade. That was really amazing international players that were playing in it. And that's still there, but I think we've got a very exportable product. It's English language for a start, which I think helps us, and it's starting to build really decent audiences in other rugby territories. So I think our vision of being the best and the most loved rugby competition, I think, is possible.
How much of that targeting and capturing of youth attention, we call it attention economy, more saturated than it's ever been, more hard to really get a hold of that, and most importantly, not just get a hold of it, but build loyalty and sustain it. How much of that is down to a developing media strategy that you have, both centrally and also then as individual clubs?
Yeah, much. It's significant, and I think just that was part of the strategy when we first came in, is to try and get the distribution out as much as possible. And so that meant, on linear channels, all games on TV. So now TNT broadcasts every single game. That meant more free to air, and especially big moments like the final. So we now have 7 games on ITV, and that's massively helped in terms of general interest. And it's the general social media channels, the TikToks, the Instagrams that again, we're seeing massive uptick in terms of interest. And YouTube just plays a big role, I think, for all sports in terms of making sure content is well curated there and there's enough of it. And I think fans, I think clubs are moving much more in this direction as well. They've got the constant sort of battle of selling a ticket tomorrow for next weekend, which is obviously marketing to a certain demographic or an established demographic, versus trying to do things that are building more of an audience, the family audience, the younger audience. Quinn's a good example. If you turn up to Quinn's on a Friday night, there's a sort of Friday Night Lights vibe to it. It's young people. There's 1 degree or 2 degree of separation between someone who knows someone in the academy. A lot of academy players that are sort of knocking around there. So there's it's different for different regions, for different clubs, but there's much more of a focus on it now.
Individuals in sport have become more and more influential, should we say, in developing brand and developing profile of clubs. Previously, the badge was always outstripped the individual, give or take maybe a couple of extraordinary exceptions. But now, particularly in the environment that we live in, social media environment, the player power environment, this is cross sport, those individuals can often drive far more attention than the badge that they play for. Yeah. Rugby has struggled to create what we would call, I would say, a global superstars, in the same way that some other sports have. And we've had this discussion with quite a few in rugby, and I understand it's almost the antithesis of what the sport is all about. It's about that collective, that team, no one's head above the parapet, all of this. But there comes a time where, as you're playing this game, where you're trying to attract the younger people, a TikTok generation, if we want to call some of that as well, how important is it that you support the development of athletes as brands, not as contradictory brands, but as their own brands to support the development of the game, and in this case, the Prem in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. You've highlighted the some of the sort of cultural challenges that have existed within what is a team sport environment. But sitting underneath this is, some of the biggest characters you'd meet in sport. They're there, and I think they've sometimes struggled to either have a voice, have the motivation to have a voice, or just generally be given a platform for it, or help develop to be like that. I think there's an important point though around what's expected of players within this. Like, it's not an idea around them, goofing around, being someone they're not on social media. The fundamental power that a player has is to be a promoter of their sport, of their team, and of themselves. And so the ability for a player or a coach or anyone else to actually say, to give some context as to what's happened or what's happening, or what they've been through, or the idea of what's about to happen this weekend in terms of a clash between A and B, and what that means to them and what that means to their club. That's stuff that you tune into and therefore get excited about it. If you look at the sort of the build up to boxing matches, the idea of rivalries, the idea, not you don't have to go down the sort of trash talk avenue or anything else like that, but the idea that this is building up to something that's big, that means you want to tune in, doesn't it? I think what's interesting with the younger wave of players that are coming in, Henry Pollocks, is that I think they're seeing this opportunity, they're seeing how other athletes are behaving, they're moving in that direction, they're trying to balance the fact that they're not legend yet in terms of their own performance and what they've achieved, and so there's this constant sort of making sure you're in check in terms of your own ego, personality, everything else like that. But I think they are. Henry's a really good example. He's seeing this opportunity to grow the sport and to be an inspiration, and I think it's happening. We need to provide more tools to that, and whether that's media training, but there's more that needs to happen there. And again, you go back to the content bit, and us investing in content that gives a stage to these folks is another thing.
Well, content's obviously been key for multiple sports and leagues, leveraging docu-series or whatever we want to call them, and some of them are brilliant, but the reason they've been so good is because they uncover the personalities behind people that we've never actually seen that behind the scenes to, or we've never properly understood what they do to achieve so much in their careers. And when we had Sam Warburton on, he was talking about the Six Nations documentary. I know Prem Rugby's done their one with Amazon.
Yeah.
But he was quite frustrated, and it aligns with something that you've said here about highlighting the best bits of rugby. He said, I don't want to see Finn Russell having a coffee before a game talking about why it's an important match. I want to see Finn Russell smashing into someone in training. I want to see what it's like to actually perform at that level, what you have to put your body through, the physical and technical sides. So, and I guess I'd back it up, watching some of these documentaries, I feel like there's been a part where it hasn't highlighted some of the best parts of rugby that make it different. And maybe it's gone down the route of other sports where the coffee and chat around it strategically is maybe more important.
Yeah.
How do you make sure that when you get these opportunities to really showcase the best parts of the game, that you're actually doing that?
I think the feedback from the players is that it needs to be high quality, really. Anything you're doing in terms of content needs to not make them look like a fool, but equally that it's actually produced well, and so I think that's there. But then if you're going to do these docos, then you're going to want to have access in the change room. You're going to want to hear the team talk. You're going to want to hear the arguments. You're going to want to hear the tension. I think that's what's good with Drive to Survive. I don't think that was necessarily achieved with the latest Six Nations doco, and I think that was part of the feedback from fans and everyone else. I hope that rugby's learned a lesson with that in terms of access. So if you choose to do these things, you really do need to sort of open up and open up the doors. But I think that we've obviously had a wave of sport docos and just specifically on the long format stuff. I think that people have you've got to be quite lucky with these behind the scenes documentaries, because unless something amazing has actually happened within a club's history, whether they've actually won a World Cup or won the league, or it can just be quite mundane. Do you know what I mean? You just feel like you're just watching a sort of day in the life of, rather than anything that's bigger. So the great sports dockers have either been retrospective, so the sort of Michael Jordan story, or they've led up to something that they just happened to have been there when it was something amazing. And so the best example of that rugby was back in 1997 with the Lions. With Living Lions, and they won that series. So yeah, I think I think that if there was going to be another sort of big doco within the sport, it needs to sort of build up to something.
And it also can quite often rely on the lucky personalities you can uncover. If it's a Drive Survive, someone just potty mouthing it like Steiner does. But that actually fed into something that we had a football manager called Michael Beale on recently, and he said something that I loved, and I'll use it loads now, but it was talking broader culturally. He said, we don't create any like Ibrahimovic type players really in this country. And I think you can probably put it across quite a lot of sports, because we don't necessarily create the environment where those absolute mavericks can succeed, just based on our cultural understanding of how people should be.
Yeah.
Do you get the feeling that actually does present a challenge when we're trying to do this kind of new wave of profiling and iconisation? It's just not in the fabric of us as a country.
It would be really interesting around how Red Bull approach this. So the team sport, the fact they own a team within that now, I think they've done brilliantly in building other players' profiles, so that it's about the sport, it's about their athleticism, it's about their personality as well. I'll be really interested to see how they take it on there, and I think others will follow as well.
What about the calendar and making sure that, you mentioned earlier that it's always a topic of conversation, making sure that the calendar supports the growth of the Prem, because international rugby is an amazing product and has been for years. In the World Cup, we know the numbers around it are brilliant, but we want that to convert. You've always got to be careful not to get lost in summer tournaments or sometimes winter tournaments based on the success of them. Does that sustain throughout? My issue continually, and it's sympathizing with you in the job that you have, is in this era now where we're recognizing the players as such important assets to build growth. If you're losing players on key game weekends, if you're having to compete with the strongest rugby product, that almost puts you on an immediate back foot, doesn't it? To be as good as you can be. It would never happen in the Premier League. So how do you work on the calendar as multiple bodies to ensure that you don't have these clashes that compromise that quality?
Yeah. So that our calendar's massively improved recently, and as part of the professional game partnership, we've tried to ensure there's clear space between international and club games. So actually there's no overlaps now with the international schedule, which helps. You've still got elements of player rest that need to happen, but our internationals are playing, now the vast majority of Prem games, and that's great, and that's what fans want, that's what the broadcasters want. But it's a constant shuffle, and I think the international schedule, has expanded since professionalism. So that's that, but then equally so have leagues and so have competitions as well. And there's a reality here that there's only a finite number of games that players can play. And so this is when everyone needs to get around a table, or has got around a table in terms of World Rugby and getting the global calendar sorted. And so you've now got the Nations Cup, which is coming up next year, which is set in stone, and so there's clear windows with which they are occupied. Our club game is pretty clear over the next few years. There's a question mark over the European schedule, which is 8 weeks. We've got an exciting new proposition with the World Club Cup that's happening in 2028, and that may dictate how, I guess, the top tier of club rugby evolves going forward. And so I think that's probably the last bit of the jigsaw puzzle for us, is in terms of that top tier competition, how the Champions Cup evolves, future World Club Cups. But you need to make use of every single one of those weekends, because again, it's a finite stock, so it needs to be selling tickets, it needs to be relevant to broadcasters. But there's no more room in the calendar for other competitions.
Well, particularly rugby is interesting, isn't it? Because there's just a physical element that you don't have in other sports, as in a healthcare element. Yeah. People reference it, if it works in cricket, it's great, but cricketers can play, they shouldn't, but they can play every other day, and they do in some tournaments. You can't play rugby at the same frequency that you can other sports based on the impact that it has on your body. So naturally that creates an even more finite amount of time to fit all of this stuff in.
Yeah. And so you need to, So the idea is more isn't more when it comes to the game, and you can't see those pressures on players loading getting any easier over time. It's an intensely physical game. There's a huge amount you can do to make sure it's safe within the times that they play, whether they're playing or whether they're training. And there's been a huge amount of work that's been done on that. And you would have seen probably in the press the last few weeks around how instrumented mouthguards have evolved, and that becomes a really important source of data in terms of learning around impact, but then also how to manage it. And then it's care off the pitch as well, and I think we're really proud of the welfare provisions that our clubs provide, and so as a result you're seeing careers that are longer in the professional game. But the answer isn't more games. So there's a flight to quality here.
Should we fire a few quick fires at you?
Go on.
See what
I
you've
heard
got.
About these. Yeah.
What sport do you look at and take some notes from, take lessons from, as to how you could develop?
It's such a cliche, isn't it? But I lived in the States for a long time, and so the US sports environment is brilliant. When you turn up to a US sporting event, especially as I used to go to a lot of baseball and NFL games, that's great. That's a great experience. And we were talking about Wrigley Field before we came online, and I would go back there every weekend. It was such a good experience there as a fan. So I do envy everything that exists within turning up at a US sporting.
Is that fan experience driven?
Yeah. It's customer service driven as well. Really digressing there, but if you remember during the 2012 Olympics, the importance of the volunteers there, that the volunteers became a massive part of the event experience. It was, if you remember, those people walking around in the purple tracksuit tops and the grey trousers, and they became inspired to deliver a great fan experience. There was a large element of customer service there and fan engagement, and that was really basic. Right? That was just volunteers there with a pointy finger saying "Go left, go right."
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And actually, when I was at the RFU, my first event was when I was at Twickenham. Wasn't a rugby game; it was an NFL game, and it was the first NFL fixture they'd had there. And I had a meeting straight afterwards with Mark Waller, who was running at that stage, and we got terrible scores in terms of fan experience. And I think there was a sort of arrogance or assumption, this is how we run our venue, this is how we run our concessions, this is how we run our wayfinding. And it just didn't resonate with NFL fans that experience other stuff elsewhere. So they were brilliant. They actually paid for a load of Disney trainers to come in and teach people how to look after people in queues and smile and various other things. And so I learned a lot through that.
That makes
process.
a difference, right?
Yeah, massive.
Because that makes you want to come back.
Yeah.
What surprised you the most about the job?
I wasn't prepared enough, or had no experience of having to engage with the media and be publicly accountable. This was the first chief exec job I had, and I was thrown into a situation where suddenly you had to explain what the hell was going on pretty quickly, and sort of fast forward 6 months, whatever it is, and you're having to do a select committee. So having to go from no experience into having to deal with that pretty much on a daily basis was massive learning curve. I think the big thing I learned was you're clearly you are a public asset. You're something that fans have a massive stake in, fans and players. There's a huge amount of people that essentially relying on you to deliver something that they enjoy. So the level of accountability there is huge.
Do you enjoy it now?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a privilege. That first sort of 18 months was full on. I think it was probably one of the most challenging jobs in sport at the time. It
was baptism of fire.
Yeah. But I mean, cat years worth of experience in terms of what it's taught me. And as I say, it's a privilege to be a part of it.
Okay, let's look at the performance side. If you can change one rule, or you look at the game and you think, oof, we need to improve this or change that, particularly with a focus on making it more of an appealing product to fit what modern sport is there something you look at with rugby and go, yeah, we need to sort that out?
Things have got better. The ball's in play a lot more. I think the scrums are quicker. It's interesting though, if you look at the World Rugby tied up a load of heart rate monitors to fans and played various different elements of the game. And the scrum was actually one of the ones that excited people. So this perception of just sort of long drawn out scrums was actually people's hearts are racing. I think it was the hacker that created pulses racing the most, and line breaks were there, but scrums are right up there. And if you speak to someone like David Flatman, he will absolutely reassure you of that. So I think that's that. But broken play where the ball's slow out of it, that people are wanting that to happen a bit quicker. But I think we're on the right trajectory. You just don't. I'm very conscious of not continually tweaking and changing rules, because I can't explain it to people, and I think fans get it as well. So I think there's a point where the sport has to settle in terms of its rules.
Yeah, I kind of hate the question because it's a great product, but you just need to, again, it comes back to almost bring everything together. If you can better package the whole thing collectively, you just know it's part of it.
Yeah.
Look at football. I mean, football's literally in play for about, I think it's between 45 and 50 minutes.
Yeah.
So I mean, it is an issue throughout.
And just explain what's going on, because once people understand, then I think that helps.
So that was another one. It was, where do you think the sport's most ripe for technological disruption?
I mean, I'm waiting for the day where you can have a player cam that is, and we have player mics, and they've trialed player cams in training. But when you can have a player cam on every player, and so you can see first person running down the wing and someone coming after you, like that's going to be exhilarating to see. Finally,
then, to wrap it all up, we've talked a lot about investment, and we've talked a lot about the future and what you want to be building. What do you think should entice an investor the most to come and put their money behind either Prem Rugby Central or one of the clubs?
We're building the most loved league in world rugby. We want to set world-class standards across performance, across commercial, across governance. We want to create stronger clubs that are sustainable and investable. We want to create a great place for players to play in. And we do that in partnership with the RPA, the Players Association, and the RFU, best academies, best medical provision. We're well on the journey with that already. And a better product for our fans, bigger games, bigger stadia, a better experience in stadia and in TV as well. We want to position the Prem as the most exportable product in world rugby. And there's plenty of proof points for that. We're definitely in a growth phase now. And we can see that with all the stats, whether it's the younger demographic, under 35 attendance went up 15% last year. Interest in the league, 18 to 34 was up 30% the last year. Back-to-back sellout finals. We sold 20% of our tickets for next year's final already. We haven't kicked a ball yet. We've doubled the number of sellouts in the last year at the clubs. TV audiences are up 30% as well. There's so many different metrics we can point towards, and all the foundational work that we've done to make things stable. And ultimately, Red Bull have invested in Newcastle, and there's plenty more to follow.
Perfect way to wrap it up. Simon, thank you so much. Loved having you on.
Thank you very much.